Can you suck it?" The lonely cowboy asked. The giant young bride, she smiles and said, "This is what I love doing best, and you will love it. Can you suck it?" The words tore from James Cooper's throat like a prayer to a god he'd stopped believing in 3 years ago. He stood there in the scorching Wyoming sun, 28 years old and dying, staring down at the woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach just 10 minutes earlier. The mail-order bride he'd never seen, never touched, never even imagined could be real. Margaret Ruth Hayes. She knelt in the dust before him, her white lace wedding dress already brown with dirt, her veil tangled in the dry wind, and she was looking at his hand like it held all the answers in the world. The rattlesnake had struck fast while he was checking fence posts, 2 puncture wounds just above his wrist, already swelling purple and hot. The venom was moving through him now, burning up his arm like liquid fire, and the nearest doctor was in Cheyenne, 2 days' hard ride through drought-cracked desert. He was a dead man. But this woman, this giant young bride who towered over him when she stood, who had hands twice the size of his late wife's delicate fingers, was smiling. Actually smiling. "This is what I love doing best," Margaret said, her voice steady and warm as summer rain. "And you will love it." She cradled his trembling hand in both of hers, turning it gently to examine the fang marks. Her touch was so careful, so tender, that something cracked open in James's chest, something he'd sealed shut the day they buried Sarah in the churchyard with their stillborn daughter in her arms. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to run. Because if this stranger saved his life, he'd owe her everything, and James Cooper had nothing left to give. Not his heart, not his hope, certainly not his broken-down ranch that barely scraped by each year. "Who are you?" he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead as the venom climbed higher. Margaret looked up at him then, really looked, and he saw something flicker in her dark eyes, something that looked like recognition, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to ask that exact question. "I'm the daughter of a cavalry surgeon," she said quietly. "Grew up at Fort Laramie before my family moved east to Philadelphia. My father taught me everything: venom extraction, bullet wounds, arrow injuries, snake bites. If it's poisonous, Mr. Cooper, I can handle it." She paused, her smile fading into something more vulnerable. "Back east they called me a freak. Too tall, too strong, too much woman for any proper man to want. But out here," she glanced at the vast empty prairie stretching endlessly around them. "Out here, maybe being too much is exactly enough." James felt his knees weakening. The poison or her words, he couldn't tell which was hitting harder. "I don't even know you," he managed. You just got here. You don't owe me anything. The arrangement was 30 days to decide if we suit," Margaret finished. She was already tearing a strip of clean cloth from her petticoat. "Well, Mr. Cooper, if I let you die in the first 10 minutes, I'd say we don't suit at all. So hold still." She positioned his arm, her fingers finding the pulse point above the wound. "This is going to hurt. The venom's already spreading. I'll need to work fast, and you need to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Trust. The word hung between them like a challenge. James had trusted once. Trusted that his young wife would survive childbirth like women had been doing since the beginning of time. Trusted that God wouldn't take everything from him in one blood-soaked night. Trusted that he could build a life, a family, a future in this unforgiving land. And every single trust had turned to ash in his hands. But Margaret was already bending toward his hand, her dark hair escaping its pins, her wedding veil falling around them both like a canopy. "I don't have a choice, do I?" James said through gritted teeth. "We always have a choice, Mr. Cooper," Margaret replied. Then she pressed her mouth to the wound and began to suck. The pain was immediate and blinding. James gasped, his free hand reaching out instinctively to grab her shoulder for support, and she let him, never stopping her work, never flinching. Suck, spit, suck, spit, a rhythm as old as survival itself. He watched her save his life and wondered what kind of woman does this for a stranger. What kind of woman kneels in the dirt in her wedding dress and puts her mouth on poison without hesitation? What kind of lonely, desperate fool had he been to think he could control this arrangement, keep his distance, protect his shattered heart from more breaking? Because as Margaret worked, as minutes stretched into eternity under that brutal sun, James realized with creeping terror that this giant young bride was already working her way past every defense he'd built, drawing out more than just venom, pulling at something deeper he'd thought was dead and buried with Sarah. And the question that should have been simple, "Can you suck it?" had become the most complicated, dangerous question of his entire life. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. Margaret finally sat back on her heels, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, her lips stained and swollen from the work. James's arm throbbed like someone had taken a branding iron to it, but the burning had stopped climbing toward his shoulder. The purple swelling wasn't spreading anymore. He was going to live. "You need to sit," Margaret said, and before he could protest, she'd slipped her arm around his waist and was guiding him toward the porch. She was strong, stronger than any woman he'd ever known, and for a moment, James felt like a child being led to safety. It should have embarrassed him. Instead, it felt like relief. She settled him on the wooden steps and disappeared inside the house without asking permission. Returning moments later with a tin cup of water and clean bandages she must have found in the kitchen. "Drink," she ordered, and he obeyed. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it washed away the copper taste of fear coating his tongue. Margaret knelt again. She was always kneeling, making herself smaller, and something about that twisted in James's gut, and began wrapping his wound with practiced efficiency. Her hands were steady. His were still shaking. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "I know," Margaret replied without looking up. There was no pride in her voice, no false modesty, just fact. "That stallion in the corral, Thunder, I saved him last week from a rattler bite too. Seems like this ranch has a snake problem." James blinked. When did you?" "The morning after I arrived," Margaret said, tucking the end of the bandage and finally meeting his eyes. "You were checking the north fence. I heard him thrashing and went to investigate. 2 fang marks on his shoulder. Venom was fresh. I did what needed doing." She stood, brushing dust from her ruined wedding dress. "You never mentioned it," James said, something like awe creeping into his voice. "Didn't seem worth mentioning. He's your breeding stallion. Your whole operation depends on him. I wasn't going to let him die while I waited for permission to help." The sun beat down on them both, merciless and bright. James stared up at this woman, this stranger who'd been living in his house for a week, sleeping in the spare room, cooking meals in silence, working alongside him from dawn to dusk without complaint. He'd barely spoken to her beyond practical necessities. Where to find the feed, when he took his meals, that the well water needed boiling. He'd been trying so hard to keep distance between them, to maintain the walls around his heart, that he hadn't even noticed she'd been saving everything he loved while he looked the other way. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the horizon where heat waves shimmered above the cracked earth. "Because you weren't ready to see me yet, Mr. Cooper. You were looking at me, but you weren't seeing me. You were seeing someone else, some ghost standing in my place." She looked down at him then, and her eyes were sad and knowing. "Your first wife, Sarah, that's her name, isn't it? The one buried under the cottonwood tree behind the house." James felt like he'd been punched in the chest. "How did you—" "I saw the grave my second day here," Margaret said gently. Fresh flowers on it. Recent. You go there every evening after supper. I can see you from the kitchen window." She sat down beside him on the porch step, careful to leave space between them, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked small, tired, human. "I'm not trying to replace her, Mr. Cooper. I know I can't. I know I'm not what you wanted. I'm not delicate or soft or easy. I'm too tall, too strong, too capable for most men to stomach. Back in Philadelphia, the matchmaker told me I'd need to go west to find anyone desperate enough to take me. Those were her exact words. Desperate enough." Her voice didn't waver, but James saw her hands clench in her lap. "So I know this arrangement isn't about love or romance or any of those pretty things. It's about survival. You need help running this ranch. I need a place where my size isn't a shame. That's the bargain. I understand." "You don't understand anything," James said roughly, and Margaret flinched like he'd struck her. He stood up, his wounded arm hanging heavy at his side, and started pacing the porch. "You think I'm desperate? You think I sent for a wife because I needed free labor?" His voice was rising now, anger and grief and something else, something hot and terrifying, pouring out of him like poison from a wound. "I sent for you because I'm drowning, Margaret. Because I wake up every morning in an empty house and the silence is so loud I can't breathe. Because I walk past Sarah's grave every evening and apologize to a dead woman for still being alive. Because loneliness is eating me from the inside out, and I thought maybe if I just had another person here, someone to talk to, someone to break the quiet, maybe I could survive one more year, one more winter, one more day." He stopped pacing and turned to face her. Margaret was staring at him with wide eyes, her composure finally cracking, and James felt something break loose in his chest, all the words he'd been swallowing for 3 years. "But you're not what I expected. You're not easy to ignore, Margaret. You fill up every room you walk into. You're loud and bright and alive, and it hurts to look at you because you remind me of everything I lost, everything I'll never have again." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You saved my life today. Twice, apparently, and I don't know how to live with that. I don't know how to live with owing you everything when I have nothing to give back." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rattling through the fence posts and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Then Margaret stood, slowly, gracefully, until she was looking down at him from her full height, 4 inches taller, substantial and solid as the earth itself. "You don't owe me anything, James Cooper," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his Christian name. "I didn't save you because I wanted payment. I saved you because letting someone die when I have the skill to prevent it isn't something I can live with. That's not about you. That's about me, about who I am." She took a step closer, and James had to tilt his head back slightly to hold her gaze. "But if you want to know what I want, really want, I'll tell you. I want to be seen, not as a freak or a charity case or free labor, not as a replacement for your dead wife or a solution to your loneliness. I want someone to look at me and see Margaret, just Margaret, the woman who can suck venom and birth calves and fix fence posts and still cry at sunset because the sky's too beautiful to bear." Her voice caught. "I want to matter to someone, not because of what I can do, but because of who I am." James felt tears burning behind his eyes, the first he'd shed since Sarah's funeral. "I see you," he whispered. "God help me, Margaret. I see you, and it terrifies me." She smiled then, sad and soft and real. "Good, because you terrify me too." She reached out and took his good hand in hers, her palm warm and calloused and twice the size of his. "So maybe we're even after all, Mr. Cooper." They stood there like that, hand in hand on the porch of a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, 2 broken people holding on to each other like drowning swimmers. And for the first time in 3 years, James felt something other than grief. He felt possibility. Dangerous, fragile, terrifying possibility. Then hoofbeats sounded in the distance, and they both turned to see a black carriage cresting the ridge, moving fast toward the ranch. James's stomach dropped. He knew that carriage, knew who it carried. "My mother-in-law," he said quietly. "Constance Pritchard." Margaret squeezed his hand once, then let go. "The woman who thinks you're dishonoring her daughter's memory by remarrying." It wasn't a question. "You heard about that?" "Small town. The mercantile clerk was very informative when I bought supplies last week." Margaret straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "Well then, Mr. Cooper, shall we show her what dishonor really looks like?" Constance Pritchard stepped down from her carriage like a queen descending to inspect conquered territory, her black mourning dress crisp despite the dust, her silver hair pulled so tight it stretched her face into permanent disapproval. She was 55 and had been wearing widow's weeds for 12 years since her husband died, as if grief was a competition she intended to win. Her eyes swept over James standing on the porch with his bandaged arm, then landed on Margaret like a hawk spotting a rabbit. "Good Lord," Constance breathed, loud enough to carry. "She's even larger than the rumors suggested." Margaret didn't flinch, didn't shrink. She stood perfectly still beside James, her ruined wedding dress blazing white in the sun, and met Constance's stare with calm dignity. But James saw her hands clench once at her sides before she forced them to relax. He knew that gesture now, the way she made herself small inside, even when her body wouldn't cooperate. "Constance," James said evenly. "Didn't expect you today." "Clearly." Constance's gaze raked over Margaret again, cold and assessing. "Or you would have hidden this situation more carefully. James, we need to speak, privately." "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Margaret," James replied. "She's my wife." "She is no such thing. You have 30 days to evaluate this arrangement, and I've been informed you're only 1 week in. There's still time to rectify this mistake before it becomes legally binding." Constance climbed the porch steps, moving between them like a blade. "I've brought my lawyer, Mr. Hutchins. He's waiting in the carriage. We can dissolve this farce today, send this woman back east where she belongs, and find you a proper wife. Someone suitable, someone who honors Sarah's memory instead of spitting on it." The words hit like a physical blow. James felt Margaret stiffen beside him, felt the way she pulled back ever so slightly, creating distance, protecting herself. "My marriage to Margaret has nothing to do with Sarah," James said, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Everything you do has to do with Sarah." Constance whirled on him, and for the first time he saw tears in her steel-gray eyes. "She was my daughter, James, my only child. She loved you with her whole heart, gave up everything to follow you to this God-forsaken wasteland. And she died here, died bringing your child into the world. The least you can do, the very least, is honor her memory by not replacing her with the first oversized woman who answers an advertisement." "Mrs. Pritchard," Margaret said quietly, and something in her tone made them both turn. She was looking at Constance with such compassion, such understanding, that James felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry for your loss. Truly, I can't imagine the pain of losing a daughter, but I'm not trying to replace her. No one could." "You're right," Constance said bitterly. "No one could. Certainly not you." Margaret absorbed the insult like she'd absorbed 100 others, her face calm and open. "You're angry, I understand. You're looking at me and seeing everything Sarah wasn't. Tall where she was petite, strong where she was delicate, alive where she's dead. And that feels like betrayal." Like the world is being cruel by giving James someone so completely opposite to the woman you loved. She took a small step forward. But Mrs. Pritchard, I promise you, I'm not here to erase Sarah. I'm here because James needed help, and I needed a place to belong. That's all. Just two lonely people trying to survive. Survive, Constance repeated, and she laughed, a sharp, broken sound. Is that what you call this? You've been here 1 week, and already you're parading around in a wedding dress like you own the place. Already you've got him looking at you like... She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Like he used to look at my Sarah. The silence that followed was suffocating. James wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his chest because Constance was right. He had been looking at Margaret differently. Had been feeling things he'd sworn he'd never feel again. And the guilt was crushing him. I should go, Margaret said suddenly. She turned to James, and her eyes were dry but devastated. Mr. Cooper, I apologize. I overstepped. This was your home with Sarah, and I had no right to act like I belonged here. I'll pack my things and catch the evening stage back to Cheyenne. You don't owe me anything, not payment, not explanation. We'll call the arrangement dissolved by mutual agreement. Margaret, no, James started, but she was already moving past him toward the door. Wait! The shout came from Constance, surprising them both. The older woman's face was crumbling, tears finally spilling down her powdered cheeks. Wait, please. Margaret stopped, her hand on the doorframe. I'm a bitter old woman, Constance whispered. I know what people say about me, that I'm cold, unforgiving, that I've been mourning Sarah so long I've forgotten how to live. And they're right, but she was everything to me, my whole world. And when she died, when they put her in that ground with her baby girl in her arms, something in me died too. She looked at James with raw anguish. I blamed you. God help me. I blamed you for bringing her out here, for getting her pregnant, for not saving her somehow. And seeing you try to move forward, try to find happiness again, it feels like losing her all over again. Like if you stop grieving, she'll disappear completely. James felt like his chest was caving in. Constance, I'll never stop grieving Sarah. Never. But I can't. I can't live in that grave with her. I tried. For 3 years I tried. And it was killing me. I know, Constance said brokenly. I know, and I hate it. But I know. She turned to Margaret, who was watching with tears streaming silently down her face. You seem like a kind woman, a good woman, and I can see why why he might need. She couldn't finish. Margaret crossed the porch in 3 long strides and did something that shocked them both. She pulled Constance into her arms and held her while the older woman fell apart. It's all right, Margaret murmured, her voice steady even as her own tears fell. It's all right to love her. It's all right to miss her. It's all right to be angry that she's gone. You don't have to stop any of that to let James live. They stood like that for long minutes, the bitter mother-in-law and the giant bride, crying together on a porch in the middle of nowhere while James watched with his heart breaking open. Finally, Constance pulled back, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. I don't know if I can accept this, she said honestly. I don't know if I can watch you build a life with someone else. But she looked at James, really looked at him, and seemed to see for the first time how thin he'd gotten, how hollow his eyes were. But I don't want to lose you too. You're all I have left of her. You won't lose me, James promised. Sarah will always be part of me. Always. But Constance, I need to try. I need to see if I can be something other than sad. Constance nodded slowly, then turned to Margaret. 1 week isn't enough time to know if this will work, but if you're truly willing to stay, to give this arrangement a fair chance, then I won't stand in your way. I'll send the lawyer home. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. "And for what it's worth, Mrs. Pritchard, I hope someday you might tell me about Sarah. Not to compare myself to her, but just to know her. She must have been extraordinary to be so deeply loved." Something in Constance's face softened, just a fraction. She truly was. The older woman descended the porch steps, paused, then looked back at James. "Take care of that snake bite. And James, don't waste this chance. Whatever it is, whatever you're building here, don't waste it." She climbed into her carriage and was gone, dust rising in her wake like a benediction. James and Margaret stood alone again in the silence, both of them wrung out and exhausted. "You didn't have to do that," James said finally. "Comfort her. She was cruel to you." "She was grieving," Margaret replied simply. "Grief makes people cruel sometimes, makes them lash out at anything that looks like happiness because their own happiness is buried 6 feet under." She turned to him, her face streaked with tears and dust. "I meant what I said, though. I'll leave if you want me to. If this is too hard, too complicated." "Stay," James interrupted. The word came out fierce and urgent. "Please, Margaret, stay." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll stay." And when he reached for her hand again, she took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining like they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the coming night. James looked at this woman, this giant, brave, impossible woman, and thought maybe, just maybe, survival wasn't the only thing left to hope for. Maybe there was something more, something worth the risk of breaking again. 3 weeks later, the drought finally broke. Rain hammered the roof like a benediction, while James and Margaret stood in the barn, watching water pour off the eaves in silver sheets. Thunder nickered softly in his stall, fully recovered, his coat gleaming. 30 days, Margaret said quietly. "Tomorrow makes 30 days. James turned to face her, his heart pounding. The wound on his arm had healed to a pale scar, a reminder of the day she'd saved him, the day everything changed. "I know. So we need to decide," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "Make this arrangement real or dissolve it." Those were the terms. He stepped closer, close enough to smell the rain in her hair, the soap on her skin. "Margaret Ruth Hayes, look at me." She did, tilting her face down to meet his gaze, and he saw fear there, raw and vulnerable and achingly familiar. "I love you," James said simply. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you saved Thunder. Maybe when you knelt in the dust for me. Maybe when you held Constance while she cried. But I love you, and I'm terrified, and I'm asking you to marry me. Really marry me. Not an arrangement, not a trial. Forever." Margaret's tears came swift and sudden. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I love you so much." He reached up, she bent down, and they kissed in the rain-soaked barn while the land drank deep and the future opened wide before them. Two broken people, perfectly fit. The lonely cowboy and his giant bride, choosing each other every single day. Love isn't about size or status or second chances. It's about seeing someone completely and saying yes anyway. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that might change how you see love, loss, and the courage it takes to try again.